Good morning. My name is James Fordham. I'm actually known locally as Darcy, which is why I've called this new channel that I've created Darcy's Diaries. I'd like to thank Ashley LaGrua, who also runs a channel called LaGrua Productions, for welcoming me onto his show today to discuss political matters. I want to be an alternative to the mainstream media, which I feel unfortunately does not offer a conservative perspective on matters. I am a conservative, and unfortunately I feel that the left has dominated the mainstream media. So I'd like to be able to offer an alternative, as many people are around the world at present. I'd like to put a thumbs up to Brandon Tatum, the Tatum Report in America, who's doing something similar. So anyway, that's enough of my brief introduction. Today's discussion is about Brexit, and I'd like to thank Ashley for the opportunity to talk about this subject. Ashley has been a friend of mine for some time, and he's a qualified journalist. He worked for the BBC for some time, and I'll pass it over to my friend Ashley. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, James. So we're going to be talking today about Brexit, something to do with Brexit withdrawal period and how we're all affected by that. This will be featuring on Darcy's new channel on YouTube, Darcy Diaries, which will simply, all you have to type into YouTube is Darcy Diaries and you'll get news, political commentary, an alternative to what is actually being spouted now by the mainstream media. And on LaGrua Productions, my channel, which this video will also feature on, you'll find Vox Pops in the Town, videos on music, bands, musicians, poetry, and more of interviews, political interviews, and mainly the arts, a philosophical debate, and various things such as. And today, one of the things I wanted to start off with was, because it seems like you really know a lot about this Brexit issue. You've really researched it, and you know you have distinctive opinions on it. I wanted to know, what do you feel are the main positive aspects? Well, let's say that we're in the process of leaving the European Union right now. That was in the news this last year predominantly, in regards to us leaving the European Union, and now we've come to a point where we will be leaving the European Union. What do you feel are the positive aspects of this, of Britain actually entering out of the European Union? What are the positive aspects for British people and for the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, when you say British people, I'd like to include people of all diversity. So we're not just talking about white people, we're talking about people who have already settled here from other countries, including the European Union, because anybody who had the right to settle before we leave will have that entitlement. So anybody who came here under free movement will gain the benefits of us leaving. So just to sort of labour that point, because unfortunately some people have been accused of being racist who wanted to leave. It's not about white people, it's about anybody who lives here, regardless of where they came from. So, to go to the positives, the fundamental positive is that we will return to a point where democracy actually starts to exist. Okay, so when we're in the European Union, a lot of the decisions which were made about law, regulation, trade, travel, freedom of movement, they were not decided by us, the electorate. They were not decided by members of parliament who we voted for. They were decided by unelected bureaucrats in Brussels, right? So fundamentally,
when you say unelected bureaucrats,
yes,
are you saying that they weren't elected to their position?
no, they were not. And they made decisions about the way that each nation state, not just us, within the European Union, led their lives. So for me, it's a democratic. That's not to say, of course, that when we return to a sovereign nation, we will have democracy, because democracy is a hard thing to fight for. But at least when we vote for a member of parliament, that member of parliament is accountable. Unfortunately, since we joined what was then the common market, which was a lie, because they said it was just a trade agreement, we did not sign up originally to, in 79 I believe, when we originally voted to join, we signed up to a trading agreement. We did not sign up to a situation where decisions around regulation, trade, travel, all of those things, law, were decided by the European Union. We signed up to, and that's not us, that's my father's generation, grandfather's generation. That's why a lot of the older generation voted to leave, because they originally signed up to a trading agreement. They did not sign up to a
What you're saying is, sorry, in 1979,
yeah,
the trading, the agreement entering into the European Union, they would only have an effect on trade, not laws.
That's correct.
Regulation, and what other things did you?
Law.
Yeah, law,
all of those
regulation.
things which are now.
And would you say the European has grown in power?
Yes.
And has, in your opinion, has started to affect, make and decide and control the laws and travel restrictions and other areas which, when the people originally signed up for the European Union, they didn't believe they were going to be signing up for the European Union having this amount of power over Britain.
No, that's
I see.
And it's not just Britain, you know, if you look at Greece, for example, Greece has one of the highest unemployment figures with young people, and that's because of the European Union, quite frankly, because they've imposed austerity on Greece. So there are certain nation states which have tried to bring about economic plans for their country, okay? And because it doesn't meet the fiscal rules of the European Union in terms of levels of borrowing, etc., they're not allowed to do it. I find it fascinating that the people on the left who supported Jeremy Corbyn, right, which is their right to do so, they wanted to vote Corbyn, okay, which is fine. Interesting enough, if Corbyn had carried out his economic plans as Prime Minister, they never would have been allowed under European law, because the European Union decides, if you are a member, your fiscal rules. Now, your fiscal rules, for anyone who doesn't understand, the fiscal rules decide how much borrowing as a country you can have. They decide how much money you can spend, etc., etc. So the fiscal rules are decided by the European Union, which is why they've intervened in Italy, Greece. So, say for Jeremy Corbyn wanted to borrow a lot of money to invest in infrastructure, he wanted to invest more money in the NHS, all of these things, right? And we can sit back and we can agree or disagree with that. if he'd become Prime Minister, his fiscal rules would have been broken and the European Union would not have allowed him to do that. So anybody, you could argue this isn't a left or right issue at all, because there are plenty of people on the left who disagreed with the European Union because Jeremy Corbyn was a socialist, right?
Yeah, I think I have a Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, was it could be said that had socialist values,
and that's fine.
But I find what is interesting is what would you say to someone who would say that global politics is best governed within major regions being consolidated, because in the sense that you've got, instead of nationhoods where you have a world full of individual nations, the European Union, could not the European Union act as like, you have America, you have Russia, you have China, then you have Europe? Doesn't it make sense in global politics to have these more power for the whole of Europe to compete and trade and work with the likes of Russia or China, these dominating forces? What I'm saying is, if Britain's more on its own, would you not say, if it's just a nationhood out of the European Union? What would you say to someone who would spout that theory?
Okay. In principle, I don't disagree. However, if you have politicians in Brussels who are lobbied by pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, to achieve what they want across the whole of Europe, then that ain't good for the people.
No.
I can tell you an example. I know somebody who had a concept to break down all of plastics into one molecule, feed it back into the system. He went to the European Union for funding, right? But the oil companies lobbied the EU and it never happened. What you've got to remember is politicians are essentially at the mercy of lobbyists, right? Politicians generally are lobbied by big business, or they've got friends in big business. So the European Union has been used by big business to achieve its aims. There have been lots of alternative medication that's been banned in Europe because the pharmaceuticals have power over a whole area, right? We're talking all the countries in the European Union, right? So they've gone to Brussels and they said, pharmaceuticals come to Brussels. You've got to remember, you and I don't have the buying power that, say, AstraZeneca has. So when people say...
Could you say for the audience who AstraZeneca is? What is
drugs
AstraZeneca?
company.
Drugs company.
Yeah. So AstraZeneca, amongst many others, have lobbied the European Union in order to water down regulations to do with drugs. Oil companies have lobbied the European Union, right? You and I can't go to Brussels with 50 quid and say, I want you to bring about social change. Won't happen.
No, I don't think so. No, I think we need a bit more than 50 quid.
Do you follow my meaning?
Yeah.
So
the powers at hand.
The more politicians you have, right? I'm in favour of having less in the way of the state, because politicians are only interested in one thing: power. Whether that's communism, socialism. If you look at the history of communism,
less of a state. Do you mean not European Union, to be Britain as a...
Yeah, but even within this country, I think the state's too big. And there is an argument that when we leave the European Union, it's just the start. Once we've left the European Union, we can then concentrate on how too much power this government has. So this government still gets lobbied by chemical companies, that's true. But at least we'll have more of an ability to lobby MPs to make decisions for us. So yes, of course, politicians in this country get lobbied by big business without a shadow of a doubt. But when you have unelected bureaucrats who make the decisions, that's where you go down a dangerous road where people with massive power can dictate what we do in our everyday lives.
And you're saying that'll be any different if we leave? That'll be different if we leave the European Union? In what way will it be different?
In what way will it be different? Well, as I said earlier, initially, the main differences on a positive note are we will be able to do trade deals with the rest of the world without having to go to the EU who decide our fate with regards to trade deals. So we will be able to sort out trade deals with Australia, America, the Commonwealth, without having to go to the EU and they decide what the trade deals are.
And what evidence do you have to suggest that the EU are wrong in their regulations and their rules that they set upon Britain?
Okay, so if you look at regulation, the problem with regulation, it tends to be quite blanket. Regulation, the argument for regulation is that it regulates business. Okay, now some regulation is good, but interesting enough, we as a sovereign nation have a lot stronger regulations already in existence than the EU has currently. So there are certain regulations which are good. Of course there are. You have to regulate. It is the job of government to regulate businesses so that bad practices don't take place. And that's around the environment, that's around people's rights at work, etc. A lot of those regulations were already strong in this country anyway, right? And a lot of them are stronger than the EU's are. So those won't go away because they're already on the statute book in this country. However, a lot of regulation favours big business, right? Because they can avoid it. It clobbers the small business person who's trying to get started business. So a lot of these regulations and taxes tend to be a blanket approach to business in general. Now, large corporations can avoid tax, large corporations can avoid regulation because they can lobby. Going back to my earlier point, if a pharmaceutical company gets too regulated, they've got the money to lobby someone in Brussels or in this country and say, guess what, we don't want this. And possibly they'll achieve that. But a small business person doesn't have a spare million to lobby a politician in this country or Brussels. So all of these political structures favour the large corporations. They don't favour the working class, they don't favour small business at all.
And that will be the case even if we leave the European Union, would it not?
The only difference will be that we will have more of a power to influence our future. So if we go back to a sovereign state, the system here is you have MPs, right? We vote in an MP, they form a government, so we have an election. This is basic stuff that everybody knows. At the last election, the majority of people voted for the Conservative MPs, right? So they became the Conservative government, right? But bear in mind that there is still an opposition. So anybody that voted Labour at the last election can still lobby their Labour MP in order to hopefully that Labour MP can then go to the House of Commons and say what he says that the constituent has asked, and that Labour MP can lobby the ministers that are currently in power, even though they're the government. So, but when we were in the EU, we had unelected bureaucrats deciding our future. I'm not saying that the system will be perfect, but at least we are voting for this MP, and we can write a letter to them, and they can prove to us. So if you write a letter to your MP and you say to them, let me think of an example. Okay, so you could write to our local MP and you could say, right, I've got problems with my disability benefits. I've not received them. I know somebody who's actually done this recently, and that MP lobbied the Department of Welfare, and this person got the backdated pay, and that's because that MP worked for his constituent, and it was achieved, the outcome that the constituent wanted. I'm not going to say who it was. But you can't have unelected people deciding our future. That's wrong. Yeah.
And that goes on with, since we've been in the European Union, there's been unelected
completely
bureaucrats that have made.
I mean, there's unelected bureaucrats in our current government. But if you look at it as a bit like evolution, we've left the EU, which is a kind of step forward to democracy. I'm not for 1 minute saying that when we leave the EU we will have a full democracy. That's not true. But we can then start to lobby for things like changes to the way we vote. So there are some people that argue, which I have sympathy for, that the first past the post system in elections isn't fair, and there are lots of alternative voting systems that we could explore. So what I'm saying is that a lot of those things would have been illegal under EU law, and I think once we get back to a sovereign state, we then can be the driving force for our future. But no, democracy will not be achieved overnight once we leave the EU at all. But it's a stepping stone in the right direction towards and who knows, we may never even achieve democracy, but it's at least worth a try, isn't it?
And would you say, so it seems that you feel that there are positive aspects to leaving the European Union, and that.
Can I give you an example of one about public safety?
Yeah, I just want to say that you feel, just to clarify, you feel that by leaving the European Union and gaining more sovereignty as a nation, that we would have more power and freedom within our own hands, and there would be less unelected bureaucrats controlling how things are done.
Correct.
Okay.
I was going to bring up one on public safety. So Angela Merkel, who is the Chancellor of Germany, she welcomed millions of refugees into Europe under the freedom of movement. A lot of these people were undocumented. And there are countless examples of these people coming into Europe. Now, in principle, we all agree that we should help people less fortunate than ourselves, refugees and the like. I don't have an issue with that. But when you have people coming into a bloc, which is the European Union, without documents, and they go missing, so their passports weren't checked, their documents were, and a lot of these people ended up becoming a nuisance to society. So in Germany, there was a massive problem with gang rapes, right? From men who came from different cultures, didn't understand the way we perceive women. And those people were undocumented. They didn't have any documents to prove who they were. There is also evidence that a lot of the terrorist bombings we've experienced, some of it's homegrown terrorism, but some are people that have come in as refugees originally. So I think there is a place for borders, because you cannot have freedom of movement. In principle, is, it's a utopian idea, right? You go where you like. The problem with that is, if you don't have border controls, you can't ascertain who is good and bad, right? Simple. So when we take back control of our borders, we decide who we want to come here and who we don't. That's fine.
Yeah, it's just a more radical way of thinking may suggest, who needs borders when there isn't even, we don't have nation states. The utopian idea of freedom of movement consists of believing that the world belongs to no nations. There needs to be a universal freedom of movement, but that is a utopian.
Do you honestly think we as a species are evolved enough to create that? When there are terrorists on the planet, when there are people who have really bad intentions, right? We're not evolved enough as a species. Maybe one day we will be, but we're not there yet. Maybe when Jesus Christ comes back. But my point being is that
Christ comes back.
there are bad people in this world.
But that is the utopian idea.
There are bad people in this world, right?
Yeah.
And there are actually quite a lot of them. And we have to have the capability to... It's not about being anti-immigration at all, because immigration will still exist when we leave the EU. It's not about stopping immigration. Right, when we leave the EU, we will still be able to travel to Europe. People will still be able to travel here. You will still be allowed to work in the EU. People from the EU will still be able to work here. That won't end. It's not about stopping travel. It's about people proving their intentions. That's basically what it is. It's about people proving that they have a reason to go to the country. And if you've got good intentions, why should you be worried? If you're not a terrorist, right? Just as one example.
Some of that is, I don't know, but you should be worried because your freedom and your rights can be infringed upon by a government or an authority, can be infringed upon, and then even if you haven't done anything wrong, it's bad. It's not right that they have that much power over your human rights and your freedom.
You have to have some rules.
It's true. You have to have some rules. Yeah, it's true. That is true. But I remember watching a documentary on the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
And Bobby Seale, the leader of the Black Panther Party, he was in an interview, and he was being interviewed, and he was saying, and it was on the topic of kind of like borders and nationhoods, and he was actually saying, the Black Panther Party have a creed. They were against the idea of the kind of the thought of nationhoods and nationality and border controls. This type of thinking leads to a world where we're having us and them, and I know there needs to be freedom. I know freedom of movement is important.
Well, you could argue we do have freedom of movement in when we leave the EU, because
freedom of movement is important.
Yeah.
But it's just, how do you feel when
So I would say to you in regards to that, do you mind me interjecting? You either have, two schools of thought on this one. First one. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, so there has to be, maybe one day we will, but we're dealing with a species, human species, and and there are good and bad in our species, right? Okay. So you have to have some kind of system to ascertain what someone's intentions are when they come into your country, right?
Of course.
Yeah. How also?
Yeah. Of course. We need some system.
So the people who advocate a more global approach, what they're actually
That's what I was
advocating,
asking.
what they're actually advocating is a global dictatorship. Because for years people have been talking about globalisation and the New World Order, right? The European Union was just the start of that. Do also people want to see a destruction of culture? The interesting thing about nations is that they all are vibrant cultures. You come from Sicily, right? Sicily is a fantastic culture. Fantastic. So is Greek culture, so is Italian, so is French, so is British, right? Now all of these nations have both dark and light histories. We all have things. Africa has a dark history. Now here's one of interest to people, slightly off topic, but Africa started a slave trade in white people before the white Europeans did with them. Anyway, all nations have their dark and light histories, that's just a fact. But do we want to end up in a situation where we curtail to a global dictatorship that's completely destroyed culture, and we are all global individuals worshipping the same God, right? No, we don't. We want to still have pride in our own culture, but still trade with other nations. So when we leave the European Union, we're not going to stop trading with France, Italy, Greece, because business won't allow that. You know, how Audi, BMW.
But shouldn't we live in a system that unifies all these nations?
Yeah, we can still
cultures,
achieve that without.
where we have differences, but we appreciate our differences.
We can have that without the EU.
And we
can have that without
work
the EU.
together.
We don't need politicians to tell us that.
No.
So when we leave, if the European Union didn't exist, right, did not exist, and you didn't have all those politicians there, do you honestly think that businesses wouldn't trade with each other? Do you honestly think that people wouldn't get on? Politicians have made decisions about how we live our lives, right? And politicians are interested in one thing only, and this goes back to ancient Greece: divide and rule. So politicians have played a narrative in the mainstream media that the police in America are racist, right? They've played a narrative that the police in this country are racist. That's not true. The Black Lives Matter organisation started off because of George Floyd being shot. No, I beg your pardon, he wasn't shot. A white police officer put his knee on
his head, George Floyd.
Correct, right, and that's where this all started.
And broke his neck.
Correct. Although the autopsy report hasn't actually concluded that the police officer was responsible yet. However, we both agree that was wrong. What people don't talk about is that George Floyd was a criminal. He wasn't an innocent person, he was a criminal. That white police officer was found to be corrupt. Nothing to do with racism. That police officer was dodgy. He probably would have treated a white person the same way.
And to bring it back to the subject of our discussion,
yeah,
how will the police then be governed in a better way if we're not in the European Union?
How will the police be governed?
How do you think that will improve the Metropolitan Police the way they are?
That would be interesting. What do you mean by the way they are?
You know, how they're represented, how their community relations with the people,
yeah,
how all of that that comes with having a metropolitan police force.
Okay, well, how will that happen?
But how do you think the metropolitan police force will be improved by us leaving the European Union, or not?
I can't honestly answer that question because it depends who is in power at the time.
Yeah.
So you have the Mayor of London. If we're talking specifically about the Metropolitan, the Mayor of London obviously represents London, and he gets funding for London. Previously, of course, it was Boris Johnson. Now that Mayor of London is elected as either a Labour politician, a Conservative politician, or a Liberal Democrat, or a Green potentially. So so that would decide
How the metropolitan police force.
So at the
is
moment,
so it wouldn't have any. It wouldn't have much of it.
Well, it would